Hey, everybody, and welcome to your next. I'm your host, Jerome, and you are in for a treat today. Pennsylvania is one of my favorite states in the country. I've got friends there from all over the place, and I've got a new friend I'm bringing you today. I've got Mahen Gundecha with me today, and I think I got it right. He'll correct me if I got it wrong, but he's giving me the thumbs up, ladies and gentlemen. So we're off to a great show already. Mahen, how are you, my brother? It's good to see you.
I'm doing fantastic, Jerome. With an intro like that, how can I not be fantastic? Pennsylvania is such an amazing state, isn't it? It's just gorgeous. We're close to
Gorgeous.
everything, but far enough from everything, right? We've got the big cities, but we've got the rural feel to it as well. So I'm in a part of the state. I'm in Westchester, Pennsylvania, which is about 45 minutes from the city. But I'm also 45 minutes from the beautiful Amish countryside, right? So all the lovely Amish farms where you see people in their horse and buggies and traditional gear. So we get the best of all worlds.
All right. So I'm sure people are like, Gunda Cha, what is the Gunda Cha? Where does Gunda Cha come
What is
from?
it really
Did
from?
you grow up, like, were you born in Pennsylvania? Tell me a little bit about your
It's
origin.
been well traveled. Let me tell you, Jerome, it's been well traveled. So my grandparents on both sides, my mom's side, my dad's side, were from northern India. They left when they were both young and settled in Africa. So mom's side settled in Kenya, in Nairobi. Dad's side settled in Tanzania, in a small town called Tanga. And I was born in Africa. So I spent the first part of my life in Africa. And then we were all UK citizens at that point. So dad said, okay, let's explore the world. And he went off to London. And so I grew up in London. And then he got itchy feet again and said, oh, okay, things are happening in Canada. Let's go to Canada. So then I spent a good part of my life in Canada and have been living in the US for about 25 years now.
Wow. He's moved around. He's our
Yeah.
favorite African, European,
Touched on most of the
Canadian.
continents at this point. Yeah.
All right. So you hit me with a left hook. You said accelerate your exit by 3 years. Did I get it right? I don't know if I got it right. Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's an interesting thought that I've been mulling over, Jerome. So, one of the thoughts I had is business owners get so busy and they get so caught up in running the company, they don't have enough time to really think about how do I maximize my exit, right? What's the right time to sell my business or transfer ownership to somebody? And it's not always, but in many cases, it's a circumstance that forces them to think about that. And it's not often a good circumstance, right? So there could be a health issue that gets them thinking about, boy, at some point I need to start thinking about selling the business. There could be a financial need, right? Whether it's college or retirement or some unexpected expense, they think about liquidating their assets. And the biggest source of value for a lot of business owners is their business, right? So that's one of the assets that they might think about starting to liquidate. So if it's driven by life circumstances, a lot of times you're never in the best position, right? You don't have a chance to present the business in the best way and unlock the true value that you built up in your business. And so one of the things I encourage people to do, whether you sell today or whether you want to do it in 3 or 4 years, is always start thinking about what do I need to do to get my business ready, to present my business well to a buyer, right? To make it really appealing to a buyer, not make it one of those situations where the buyer has to wade through really complicated financials to figure out what's the true situation, right? Make the financials really clear, really transparent. Not make it a situation where there's way too much debt in the business and the buyer has to wonder about, well, what's the true cash flow of this business, right? Or a situation where, you've got staffing gaps or all sorts of things, right? So just get your house in order and then figure out what kind of numbers would make sense for you. And I think that's probably a really interesting question for people to mull because they might have this rough idea that, you know what, I think my business is worth, pick a number, 3 million, 5 million. And when the time is right, that's the number that I think I can count on to sell my company. But there are a lot of different components that go into that. One of the biggest pieces is say your business is worth 5 million. How much of that 5 million are you going to realize when you actually close the deal? Right? Are you going to get all 5 million or is it going to be a part of that? And in most situations, it's a part of the right? It could be 60%. So you could get 2, 3 million at the time you close. You're going to have to pay your transaction cost. You're going to have to pay your taxes. So the amount you're left with is actually going to be quite a bit smaller. So start thinking about that. And then the other thing to think about is when you take a look at your overall financial picture, how much do you need your business to be worth, right? It's not how much is your business worth, but how much do you need your business to be worth in order for you to think about selling or exiting? And I think that once you have that number worked out, then you can figure out, is there some way that I could get to that number? And one example I'll throw at Jerome is in that scenario we just talked about, where say you get half of the value of your business, 2.5 million, when you close, you could roll what we call rolling equity, which is basically keeping some equity in the business, but under new ownership, right? In a bigger company. Say that you take 1.5 million of the remaining amount as equity in the new company. In 3 or 4 years, if you pick the right buyer, that equity could increase 3 to 4 fold, right? So it could be worth more, significantly more than the amount you realized when you actually sold the business. So that's the other piece of it that I'd like people to start thinking about, that there could be really smart ways to unlock value in your business. So when I say you could exit 3 years ahead of time, that's an exact scenario where you could, right? Where you get a nice liquidation event, a good amount of money when you sell the first time, but then you hang on to some equity, watch that equity grow, and it could be worth 2 or 3 times the amount that you got when you actually sold the business. So that's one way where over a 3 year horizon, you could actually exceed your financial expectations.
Oh, so it's
It's
very
hard to get your head around, right? And there's a lot of,
uh,
lot of
I
complexity to it.
I actually think it's really simple, and it goes to, but it's a paradigm breaking concept, right? Most people like, oh well, if I sell for, I'll make the number 10 just because it's better. It's easier for me to divide by two. If I sell the business for 10, I'll get 10, but you're probably only going to get five after taxes, assuming that it's all cash deal. Most deals aren't all cash, so there's probably some buyout or rolled
That's right.
equity in the deal. And so maybe you only get 2.5, or maybe you get 1.7.
Yep.
Whatever the number is, it's not what you thought it was. And so the walk away isn't what most people think. And that is probably the biggest misnomer for the people who haven't been
Yep.
through an exit before, and the ones who haven't actually got into the details of the people's stories of the people who have exited. Because most people don't say, hey, I netted this after I sold. They say I
That's
had
right.
a 10 figure or a
Yeah.
9 figure or an 8 figure exit. And then they leave it at that. And
Yeah.
those dollars don't always go as far as many people think they
That's
will,
right. That's right.
because I was talking to a buddy yesterday, and he was like, "Look, man, people who think that they're going to have an 8 figure exit and then live off $10,000 or $20,000 a month have no idea what they're getting into." He's like,
Yeah.
"Because every budget 75, 80, $100,000 a month, especially if you're changing cars and houses and
Yeah.
even the way you travel and vacation." And his example was, you can go to Disney and you can stay at the Ramada Inn or something a little bit nicer, or you could stay on Disney property and
Yeah.
spend something less than $10,000.
Yeah.
Or you can go stay at the Four Seasons, get the private pass, not wait in line for anything, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and spend 25 to 30. And it's, well, what are you going to tell the folks that you're going with, that you can't afford to do it
Yep.
once you actually get into that place? And so there's some expectations that come with being in that new level of, we'll call it wealth. And
Yeah.
so the thought of de-risking your life by taking some money off the table, selling a minority interest in the company, seems like a very wise decision. I think the stat out there is like 80% of people who own a business have their 80% of their wealth tied up in it.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so if you're that concentrated and something happens, and we talk about the three
Mhm.
D's and a B: divorce, death,
Yep.
disease, or burnout. If one of those four things happen and your business isn't ready, you're likely to have to sell it for a lot less than you planned on selling
That's
it, or closing it, which
Or
is
closing it, Jerome, right? So many people have to unfortunately go down that path where they don't have a sellable business.
so. you help folks transact, right? You help folks sell their business, and you probably help them grow value before they sell. What
Yeah.
makes a business sellable? Because this is something that eludes folks. Because I was reading
Yeah.
something, or I think I was watching a video, and they're like, only 20% of businesses that get listed sell.
That's
And
right. That's
so
right.
you're 2 in 10, right?
Yeah.
And we like the other side of that stat that only
Yeah,
25.
yeah. So how do you get into that 20%, right?
Yeah.
So that's the trick. And so I think part of it is timing, knowing when to sell, because I can tell you stories about people who've waited too long, right? They've got aspirations that they can't necessarily meet. So say you're 55 to 60 years old and you have aspirations that you're going to grow your business by 25% or by 50%, right? And then exit. The problem with that is you just don't have time, right? So if life comes along, say your biggest customer who's 15 or 20% of your sales leaves for whatever reason, say your top two employees leave for whatever reason, say we get hit by another economic down cycle, right? And valuations are crushed. So there's nothing you've done. It's just that valuations are down in the market for a couple of years. Say you have to sell when one of those circumstances transpires. Unfortunately, you're going to walk away with less money than you had anticipated just because, the world is full of risks, right? And so hanging on to the business could actually be riskier than you had thought. So one of the questions I like to ask people, especially when they're of a certain age, right, is when do you think the opportunities to grow your business will be outweighed by the risks that face your business? Right? So have you done that fine calculus to say, look, these are all the risks. I've done that external analysis, right? These are all the risks that could face me. And then on the other side of it, these are all the opportunities that I have to grow. So how could you grow? You could acquire a competitor. You could invest, right? You could take a loan and you could invest. You could invest in operations. You could invest in sales and marketing, all sorts of things you could do to grow. What could the risks be? We've talked about a few of those life-related risks, right? Health and financial circumstances. The other one that is hitting a lot of industries is consolidation. So if you look at, especially a lot of the B2B service industries, like let's say HVAC or commercial cleaning or painting or IT services, a lot of those businesses are being acquired. So you've got large strategic buyers and you've got private equity who are nibbling away at businesses that are generating profit, right? 500,000 in profit, 1 million in profit. And they're putting together this book of 15 or 20 different acquisitions that all of a sudden will be worth a lot more. So they're playing kind of the scale game. So a bigger business is worth more than a smaller business. If you put a profit multiple on a small business, it could be 5, right? So say you've got a business that's worth $1 million in profit, it could sell for 5 or 6 times that profit number, right? So it could sell for maybe $3 million. If you've got a business that's generating 10 million, it could sell for a lot more, right? The multiple expands. And so that multiple could be 10, it could be 12. And so you've created just by putting together different businesses, right? And creating that mass, you've created scale just by increasing the multiple. And then you've got all the synergies that go along, right? You've got all the cost savings and efficiencies and common platforms and everything that you build to increase efficiency in the business. So that's the game that's going on in many industry sectors. And one of the questions that I'll sometimes ask people is, okay, your largest competitor within 50 miles was just acquired by a large private equity firm. What do you think that private equity firm wants to do with that company? Do they want to leave it alone and let it chug along at a 5% annual growth rate? Or are they going to inject it with some capital? And are they going to try and grab some of your customers, right? Because it's all about bringing on new logos. It's all about expanding as quickly as possible. So you need to start thinking that if one of your competitors in your region has been acquired, that just amped up the risk for you because chances are they'll have more resources, right? They'll have better staffing, right? They'll have more professional management in place. And chances are they may be able to compete for your customers more effectively than you. They may be able to offer better services, better products, and they may be able to do it at a lower price point, right, than you can do it. And so over time, you've got to put into your calculus when we did that opportunity risk balance, right? On the risk side, you've got to layer in that there's a real significant risk that over a 2 or 3 year period, you're going to lose, not you might lose, but you're going to lose a couple of your big customers and you're going to lose a couple of members of your team, right? Your key talent. They're going to migrate towards that bigger, better resource company. So that's another trend that I see that a lot of people aren't really baking into their analysis.
So what you're saying is the big bad wolf is coming.
Yeah, we don't
When
want to
people get
scare
bought out.
anybody, but just keep your eyes open, right? Keep your eyes open.
Well, in concept though, market share is king because
Mhm.
if you can control or set the market, then you can print money. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so the consolidation of a lot of these industries is something that I think founders have to pay attention to. And if
You
they're not
have
to
to, right? Yeah.
consolidate her,
Yes,
then they need to be aware of who is the one doing the consolidating
that's
and
right.
what they can do to differentiate themselves because
You hit it,
efficiency.
Jerome. You hit it. You got to differentiate yourself, right? To compete in that world, you got to differentiate yourself. You've got to offer something that they're not offering.
So, do you think it's wise to reach out to acquirers and tell them you're interested in being acquired if you know that they're operating in your market? Or is that something you should wait for them to reach out to you for?
I would say you lose a little bit of negotiating power. If you reach out, you lose a little bit of negotiating power, right? And you give up some value. So the way that we've seen work really well, so in a lot of those industries that I talked about, those B2B type of industries, a lot of people are reaching out to companies directly, right? So the private equity firms have business development teams that are reaching out to founders directly. Large regional companies are reaching out to companies directly. And it's always good to have those conversations and understand what an offer could look like. But my advice to business owners is you want to run an auction process, right? You want to make sure that everybody knows there are a couple of players in the game, and that way they put forward their best foot. Otherwise, if you're dealing with just one buyer, there's no incentive for them to offer you the best deal. I guarantee you will not get the best deal, right? You certainly won't get the most cash at closing. And so one of the things that you can do is if you're represented by somebody, it could be us, it could be somebody else, is they'll make it very clear that, look, this is a competitive process. We've got some really good players who are interested. And then we can give them some guidance, right? To be competitive, guys, here's where you need to come in, right? Here's what the multiple needs to look like. Here's what the cash at close needs to look like, right? Here's the equity structure that the founder would really, like to think about. And so we can try and steer the terms in that direction. And the other thing we can do, Jerome, is a lot of times I've heard stories about where founders will try and negotiate a deal with a buyer directly. And it just goes on and on and on and on, right? 6 months later, still there's no signed deal, right? 8 months later, there's still no signed deal. Part of it could just be lack of discipline on both sides. But part of it could be intentional, right? It's like at some point, the founder gets so worn down, right? There are so many data requests that come that the buyer will try and renegotiate the deal, renegotiate the deal. Oh, we didn't know this when we sent you the letter of intent, right? Oh, this is new information. Oh, you just lost this customer. And they'll try and ratchet down the valuation over time. And the business owner will just be so exhausted by the process that they'll say, I just want out. Okay, let's do it, right? Let's just go. And so having somebody represent you, that person is the intermediary. They shield you from all of that, right? And we can be a little bit more clear with the buyers that, look, we're going to give you 90 days to close this deal, right? We're going to open up a data room. We're going to tell us everything you need, right? We're going to put everything in there. And then within 90 days, you have to have all of your diligence done. You have to have all of your financing sorted out. We want all of the agreements in place and let's get ready to close. And then if they don't close within 90 days, we may give them an extension of a couple of weeks. But if they don't at that point, then we'll say, guys, look, this is just going on too long. We've got others who are interested. Either you step in and get this thing done, or we've got other parties that we need to go to.
Yeah, sounds like a forcing mechanism. That thing that you describe where the sellers beat up, we call it deal fatigue. And it's just worn slam out, the highs and the lows of the journey of
Oh, it's
business.
exhausting. It's exhausting. Yeah.
And then on top of that, you have to deal with the thought of you thought you were hitting a finish line and there was relief and rest. And it's like, no, you still got to run the business.
Yeah, that's the thing. See, I'm glad you're hitting on all the key points here, right? Because that's the thing that business owners underestimate that, you know what, this whole process is a beast and it's going to just suck you in. And you're going to have to relinquish some of your responsibilities. So if you don't have a really, really strong leadership team that can take over all of your responsibilities, then the business may well suffer, right? There may be things that you just can't get to fast enough because you have this whole other world now that you're dealing with.
Whole other world that you're dealing with. I find it pretty difficult for founders to be able to run the business, run a competitive process for the sale of their business, and do everything else in their world. Do
Yeah.
you have guidance or advice for founders who are still deeply entrenched in the day to day, but thinking about exiting their business?
That's a really, really good question. And I would say to founders, do you want to put another $1 million in your pocket? Right. So let me ask you, founder, do you want to continue running all the aspects of your business as is and sell it for $1 million less? Or do you want to work yourself out of the business and sell your business for $1 million more? Right. Pretty easy question. So counterintuitively, almost, Jerome, more sellable businesses are the ones where the founder has a very limited role, right? The founder has completely handed off their operational responsibilities, their financial responsibilities, their client-facing responsibilities. They've handed all of those responsibilities off to other members of their team. And in the most successful situations, we've seen a really strong number two, right? Who's either this called the CEO or the COO or the president or whatever title you want to give that individual, but he's the successor to the founder. He or she has been trained by the founder to run every aspect of the company. And the question I like to ask a founder is if we stranded you on a desert island for 3 months, right, without a phone, would your business continue to operate, right? Would there be any issues? Would you lose any customers? Would you lose any sales? Would you lose any staff? And if the answer is no, I have very little to do with the business, my team runs the show, then that's a great sellable business because it says a couple of things to a buyer. One thing is business continuity. So once the founder leaves, there aren't going to be a lot of issues. You know, it's not like that founder is needed to continue to operate the business or like some of the key client relationships are only in the hands of the founder, right? Those have been distributed to others in the organization. And the other thing it does is it allows me as your advisor to justify adding your salary back on the P&L, right? Basically doing an add back to expenses. So say you're drawing 200,000 a year in salary and say your business is going to get 5x multiple. So we can add 200,000 profit straight back to the expense line and 200,000 times five, that's how we get to another $1 million in your pocket. Because we can say he or she is taking salary from the business, but has no role in the business, right? It's strictly a financial arrangement. There's no need for this salary on the business. It's surplus.
Yeah. Doesn't sound like a lot of work, but I know that you need.
Business, put another $1 million in your pocket.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So one of the things that I know that's out there is, oh, well, we're just going to do arbitrage. We're going to do a roll up and then we'll exit and we'll get a 10x multiple instead of 5x multiple. I
Right.
think most people underestimate the difficulty of the integration of the acquisition. And so I know we talked about growth through acquisition a little bit earlier, but can we dig in a little bit on
Yeah.
maybe some of
Yeah.
the risk associated with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you one example. There was a business owner I was talking to and had built a young guy, right? Young guy. So that's one caveat. Early 40s, had built a really good business, about 5.5 million in revenue, really profitable, maybe 2 million in profit. So very attractive to a lot of different types of buyers. And I said, look, we can get a really, really nice number on the table for you, right? Maybe like 12 million, 15 million. And we can think about a really nice amount of rollover equity that could grow pretty dramatically. So you could walk away with $25 million or more after 3 or 4 years. And he thought about it, thought about it, thought about it, and was really close to doing it. And at the end of the day, his calculus was, I get everything that you're telling me about the risks, right? I get everything about de-risking. but I'm young. I can weather it, right? So I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to try and grow organically as quickly as I can. I'm going to hire some more people. I'm going to pump more into sales and marketing, and I'm going to do a couple of small acquisitions. And I'm going to try and give this another 3 to 5 years on my own. And then at that point, I'll still be young enough to figure out if I want to sell. But if I don't take this shot, it's always going to bother me, but that I never took this shot. I should have tried it on my own, right? So I'll say that it depends on your life circumstance, where you are in your journey. So for that particular founder, that may well have been a good decision, right? I cannot argue with that decision. I think that's something that you just need to do. And if it doesn't work out, not a big deal, right? You're young enough, you can reinvent yourself, you'll do something else. But where I think it becomes more challenging is, say you add 10 years, right? So you add 15 years to age, right? And now you're up in your late 50s. It's a different situation at that point. You could try it. The risks become amplified, right? Every risk, you just don't have time to make up the downside of that risk. So say you do an acquisition and say it doesn't go your way. You spend a lot of money to buy this company. For some reason, they just can't hang on to their clients. You can't hang on to their staff, which we see a lot, right? With businesses after they've been acquired, a lot of times the staff will leave. The customers who were loyal to the original founder will leave. And so you've overpaid for that business. And it's really, really hard for you to then make up that gap. So I would say if you're of a certain age, the risks really get amplified. And there's nothing that says you can't do it, but just be aware, right? Eyes wide open that you've got to figure out what the risks are. So when you're doing your calculus, you've got to bake in more of that risk scenario. And then how are you going to mitigate those risks? So say the business all of a sudden is worth 25% less after you do all of this. What's your plan, right? How are you going to get out of that hole? And if you've got a decent plan and you know what that looks like, great, go for it, right? But where it gets a little bit more complicated is if you don't have a plan. If your plan is hope, I hope that I'll get another big customer. I hope that I'll be able to accelerate my growth. That's not a strategy.
What do you mean? I can't just hope my way through this? Come on.
It's worked for some people, I'd say. Yeah, it's definitely worked for some people, but unfortunately, it hasn't worked for a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't know anybody that hope is the answer for.
Hope
That
is
has
great,
to.
right? Hope is what drives you, but you've got to have a plan, right? That hope has to be built on a plan.
So I'm out here. I hear all this stuff, and I'm like, all right, man, I hear you, but I don't know how this actually works. What do you? What does someone do? Like, do they come to you? Do they call you? Like, what happens? Like, how do I move from I'm thinking about this to I need to have a conversation
Yeah.
with you
Yeah.
and
I think you got to get out of your own head, right? At some point, Jerome, right? I think business owners are so busy and sometimes they don't have a confidant, right? They don't have somebody they can really talk to. And so they're thinking all these things in kind of an echo chamber. And so having a sounding board is sometimes very, very helpful. And so we're certainly happy to play the sounding board. Low risk venture for any founder. We don't charge, there's no retainer, there are no upfront fees. We're happy to do a valuation of your business, give you a sense of what it is. There's no fee involved in any of that. And the way that our business model works is we work on a success fee. So if we sell your business for terms that are agreeable to you, then we'll get a percentage of the sale. And it's pretty reasonable. People who are used to selling a house, it shouldn't be a surprise kind of what that looks like. So that's entirely on the back end. We don't make a penny up until that point. So we do a ton of work at risk. We're happy to share all sorts of insights with you, happy to introduce you to buyers. And if it works, that's great. If it doesn't work, no harm, no foul. That's our business.
wow. So you get all of this information and you basically de-risk going down the path of finding out what the business is worth and who are the interested buyers. Like, why would somebody not reach out?
Why would you not? We're always happy to have a conversation. There's no obligation, right? We're not going to tie you into a contract or anything like that until you decide you're going to sell. So it's always good to educate yourself, get some different perspectives. And our intent is just to build a network of really good referral sources. So if you as a business owner go through this process with us and then you say, you know what, I think I'm not ready for another 3 or 4 years, perfectly fine. Let's stay in touch, right? Let's update your valuation every year. Let's give you some insight on some new buyers that we've talked to who might be a really good fit for you. And then introduce us, right? If you feel that we offered a service, right? Introduce us to other business owners in your network. That's what it's all about.
We've covered a ton of ground today, Mahen, from India to Africa to Europe to Canada to the US to selling your business to growing through acquisition to reaching out just to find out information to
Yeah,
understanding that you don't have to sign a deal in order to learn about what's going on and how to be sellable, because there's a difference between having a business and having a sellable business.
that's right.
If we really wanted to pick one thing that the listener should take away from this episode, what would you say it is?
I would say really be very optimistic about your business, but always keep in mind the risks versus the opportunities, right? Always balance the risks versus opportunities and calibrate as you go through your journey in life. So as you get older, right, bake in more of those risks that could come along, whether they're health risks or financial risks or the consolidation risks that we talked about, or if you're doing an acquisition, right, the acquisition risks that could be out there. So each year that goes by, I would say sit down, right? Once you've gotten your cadence in the beginning of the year, whether it's January, February, once you caught your breath from the year end, just sit down and think about all of the opportunities that you have ahead of you in your business. And then think about all of the risks that can hit you and think about it as concentric circles. So inner risks to you, right? What are the risks to you? So burnout, stress, health, right? Finances. Then think about risks that are external to you. So, what is within your control? What decisions are within your control? What decisions are outside your control? And they could be economic factors, right? It could be a recession. It could be the consolidation trend. It could be a change in technology, right? So there could be a shift to a new product or a shift to a new type of service, right? Or the level may increase and you may not be able to operate at that level. So think about everything that you need to do and all the risks that are external to you, and that will give you a really, really much clearer picture on when is the right time to start thinking about taking some risks off. And, the answer is every year that goes by, you need to think a little bit more actively about taking risks off the table. And at some point, there's going to be a place where the valuation makes sense, right? Whether it's that upfront exit number that we talked about, or whether it's that 3 or 4 year composite number with that second exit, right? With the rollover equity in that second exit. But there's going to come a time where the economics make more sense, right? The risks and the economics meld together. And that's a really good time for you to start thinking about this process.
Ooh, talk about tactics, like very prescriptive. Beginning of the year, figure out what the risks are, figure out how much you need to take off the table to de-risk it in a way that you feel is responsible,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
just
Almost
move
do a
through.
SWOT analysis, right? Do a SWOT analysis of your business and then do a SWOT analysis of your life, right? Do those two things, right? What went really well last year? What were you the most proud of last year? What worried you about last year, right? Which of those worries do you think will continue into this year, right? Which of those worries will get even more amplified this year? And then start putting together a plan, right? How many of those things can you mitigate, right? So if your biggest competitor was acquired and you think that they're going to start actively soliciting your customers, put in a defense plan, right? Put in a plan to put a shield around all of your big customers, right? Pick your top 20 customers, go out, visit them actively every quarter, right? Have a face-to-face meeting with that customer. Do a customer survey, right? Ask, how are we doing? Where can we do better, right? How do you find our pricing? Not how do you find our pricing? How do you find our value, right? Are you getting good value for our products or our services, right? Where can we improve? So I'd say be much more proactive, right? Be on the lookout for all of those insights that you can get from your customers and from your employees who are dealing with your customers, and then bubble those insights down. I'm just brainstorming here, right? Have a quarterly meeting with your top leadership, right? Where you discuss all of these insights you're getting from your customers. They're talking about other companies in the marketplace. You'll get some insight that, oh yeah, company XYZ approached us, right? They made us an offer that's 15% lower than you, right? And we're seriously thinking about it. Or we really like you guys, but the economics are just too great on the other side. What can you guys do? So always be listening, always be engaged, and then fine tune your strategy. I think that's a really great way to stay relevant.
Wow. You guys probably should play this one back. If you're on the front side of the exit and you're trying to figure out what's happening next, Mahen just gave you a playbook on what to
Yeah.
do. And it doesn't start when you want to sell your business in 6 months. He's telling you this is a multi-year process. And if done
Yeah.
right, you can have multiple bites of the apple. Mahen,
And
thank you
just
so
think
much.
about all of those pieces of collateral that you will have accumulated when it comes time to sell your business. If you do a voice of the customer survey, right? And you can show that we're getting 9.5 out of 10 across the board on all the metrics, right? And this is the qualitative feedback we're getting from our customers. And you have that for your top 10 or top 20 customers. Just imagine how powerful that will be when it comes time to talking to a buyer.
I love it. Man, this has been packed with nuggets and jewels. And so I encourage you to go back and get your notepad out and take
Yep.
notes and maybe start allocating some time on your calendar to get these action items done. Because he gave you action items, he didn't just give you theory, he gave you prescriptive steps on things that you should do. And so if the listeners want to reach out, man, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, Jerome. So I put my email in the chat. It's just my first name, Mahen, Mahen at Bristol.group. So Mahen at Bristol.group. You can also hit me up on LinkedIn. I'll put my LinkedIn coordinates into chat. But yeah, always happy to have conversations. Don't hesitate to call. I always answer calls. So look forward to meeting some key members of your audience and hopefully engaging with you again, Jerome. This has been fun.
This is awesome, man. Thank you so much. To the listeners, your dreams should be real. We'll catch you on the next episode.